Thank you very much. That was a short example of how I perform my music live. And I use only analog synthesizers for making my music. First of all, what is an analog synth? Well, it's all up to how it generates the sound. Same thing with digital synthesizers and samplers. It's the way of how they make the sound. In an analog synthesizer, you basically have the electronics generating the sound, so that they are making the electrons oscillate, and you get a tone, a signal that you can actually hear. You only need to drive it through an amplifier, and you can hear the signal. So that's what an analog synth does. Now, a digital synthesizer, that's basically a computer that makes digital representation. It kind of creates it by calculation or by sampling. That is, you record a signal and you play it back. That's a long story short, so to say. That's what the difference between analog and digital synthesizers. Nowadays, it's actually not such a big difference because you have digital synthesizers that emulates how the analog synthesizers sound. So, why only analog synths? There are three major reasons why I choose to use only analog synths. And this is, first of all, sound, then the feel, and then limitations. And one of these are above the others as a reason. First of all, the sound. Everybody says that analog synthesizers have such a nice sound, sounds punchy and warm and organic. And especially the warm and organic comes from the way how the sound is generated, because it uses electrical components. And especially in old synthesizers, they were most cheap, and you don't get a linear response. That makes the sound more warm and natural. Also, the sound changes with temperature. When they warm up, they get out of tune. I am afraid they're probably a bit out of tune already because it's really hot in the room. The changes change also with age. And interesting thing also, because the way the sound is generated, it's actually generated. It's not sampled. That means that each note is actually different. And I have a short example to show you. So we basically recorded from this analog drum machine a snare hit. So the first example, we have just one hit, which is repeated 4 times. It's been recorded, and we play back the recording 4 times. And this is how that sounds like. Okay, and then we play the same thing. We now put the drum machine to play it, and it plays the note 4 times. And that sounds like this. Okay, not much of a difference, right? But when you actually zoom in those 4 hits from the drum machine, you see that, hey, they don't look at all the same. They're actually different. They're like, and if you listen closely, you can hear that, okay, actually the sound's slightly different. You can see that, for instance, you see the amplitude is a bit lower on one here, and then you see that there are actually some harmonic content variations in this one. And here you can see that the slope, the decay, is actually not similar to the other ones. So yeah, every note is actually different. So then when we go to the next slide, we will take a new listen. We put now 32 hits of this one digitally sampled drum, and it sounds like this. Okay, and now we listen to when the drum machine plays it back 32 times, the same sound. It sounds almost as an engine. You can hear there is like small variations in it. But on the first one, you can notice that there is kind of a digital sameness to everything. So this is probably the reason why I used analog synths then. Wrong. This is not the main reason. You can actually, nowadays you have digital synths that can emulate this variation as well. So it's not like a main reason for me. The second reason, which is more difficult to recreate with software especially, you can nowadays have your entire studio in the digital domain. And then it's a feel. It's the feel of the instrument. It doesn't actually feel like a real instrument when you play with a software synth. First of all, okay, you sit in front of a computer, and then also you need anyway some type of keyboard to connect to the computer. And you notice when you hit the key, it's not like instantly there, the sound. And then the unreliability of software. To cut this short, an example I can say, this morning my alarm clock app had crashed. I woke up and realized that my alarm clock app has crashed. So yeah, about software. The other thing about feel also is that when you actually play an instrument, you do it physically. You actually play it and interact with it. This is not just analog synthesizer, it's any hardware synthesizer. When you play it, you get like the instant feel of it, that the note comes out and it just feels like, you get a different feeling from it. And then there's another aspect. When you actually work, it's the physical experience, so to say. When you actually tour, you lift the synths in and out, and you play with them, you crawl under them and plug in cables and so on, and you get your pump up, basically. Your heartbeat rises. And it's actually this physical experience, and that you're not sitting in front of a computer all the time. That's really important, because that's make you creative. It's the same thing when you go out for jogging, and then you feel like, wow, now I have new ideas coming and so on. It's the same thing. And that's really important for a musician and for a composer. But is it the most important thing? No. The most important thing why I use analog synthesizers is the limitations that they impose. Because today, computers gives us virtually limitless options. You can have a whole studio inside your computer, and you can do anything. And that can be quite daunting, especially if you're supposed to create new music. And well, somebody perhaps orders a composition from you and then say, okay, create us a piece of music for this celebration or whatever. And it's like, where to start? It can be quite daunting, actually. So by using, I made a decision because I was collecting analog synths at the time, and I started to think, hey, this type of music could actually be done using only analog synthesizers. So then I basically made I created myself a canvas and palette. So these are the tools I can work with and nothing else. And that's quite actually rather limited, because, for instance, some of the synths are so old so that you cannot play a chord from them. Try to play a chord here and just one note comes out, for instance. And they may only have like 2 or 3 sounds per synth, and they are noisy and all kinds of stuff. So it's really like, this is really important, because once you have set your border, and okay, so here's your canvas and here's your palette, this is what you can do. Then you start directly thinking about, okay, then you see the whole picture. Okay, so this is what I can work with. Okay, what if I try to use just really a lot of paint, so I get like a 3D texture or something, stuff like that. You directly start to bend and push the boundaries, and that makes you, I think, really creative. So this is actually what I think is the most important aspect of the whole thing. Now, performing with these synths live, I actually bring twice the amount of stuff with me on each gig. I have done about 100 gigs as Kebu so far, and I bring all this stuff with me. So how do I make it work? I use a sequencer, which looks basically almost like this, and that controls all the synths that I don't play in real time, because still I only have 2 hands. The other thing that I bring with me is a digital mixer, and that digital mixer helps me to put, I can change the complete mix for each song, and that's really important for me. I mean, just for instance, take how this synth sounds like without effects. Kind of a bit boring, but then you just add some effects on it, and it's like a new machine. And as you noticed, it directly influenced how I played. I started to play more slower, not as fast as previously. So this is really an important tool that I use as well. Now, another thing that I do when using only analog synths, as I mentioned, I just have a few sounds, and that's you can layer sounds. That's a really common trick, but anyway, or technique actually. I'll just show you the basics of it, how it works. So take, for instance, I made a sound in this one synth for a tune which sounds roughly like this. Quite a nice sound, but it didn't have actually the attack that I wanted. So I thought that, well, how does it sound on this synth, which is almost the same synth, came out a couple of years later, and it sounds like this. quite different still. But the thing is that when you try to play them, when you play them both, you play them as a layer, then it sounds like this. So I kind of get the benefit from both sides. I get the fullness of the lower synth, and I get the attack from the higher synth. So that's about layering. Now the last technique which I want to share with you is how to make monaural sound. That means a sound that comes in mono. I want to spread it out, make it a bit fatter and fuller. So as an example, I have this machine here. So this is what the sound sounds like coming out from this old string machine without any effects or anything. It's actually quite nice. And the only thing is that, well, it's dead in the center. It's nothing happened kind of around it. So what you can do easily is that you can take the one signal that you get from it, you panorate it to one side, and then you delay the signal and panorate it to the other side. And then it sounds like this. So now you're using the whole how to say, the area. So you can really feel here that they fill the room directly, completely different, really nice. And what you can further do then with this, you can, for instance, add effects on it. Let's put on a phaser. Now you didn't only get the fullness, you also got a bit movement in the sound. So that is roughly what I want to show you. This is how I do music. It's not like analog is absolutely the best. It's just a way of method of working that I decided for myself. It's really, it's not about the tools. It's about how you use them. Thank you very much.